Welcome back, or welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. And this week we're going to talk about cross training and how to use it whether you're injured or just trying to increase your volume of cardio work because you don't want to or can't run at a really high volume. Also, spend a couple minutes talking about how to prime your glutes if you struggle to use them on a run, and a couple thoughts on UTMB because it's such a hot topic right now. I wanted to put in my 2 cents because it felt inappropriate not to, if I'm going to be really honest. So if you don't want to hear my thoughts on that, that's fine. Skip about 5 minutes in, and that should take you almost directly to the cross-training topic. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Franz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. So today I want to talk about cross-training, but first, before we get into everything, just a quick tip. I've been talking to a lot of people lately on people who struggle to find their glutes when they run, and this can show up in a bunch of ways. One, you just might not feel it. Two, you don't have the power that you think you might need. And if this is you, before you go out for a run, in your warm-up, you can just do a couple unweighted hip thrust and see how that goes. So you can put your bottom of your shoulder blades on a bench or a couch or a coffee table or whatever, and then your feet out a little bit away from your body. And then you're going to scoop your hips underneath and just squeeze your butt. So you're pushing your hips to the sky. You're not going so high that you end up in your lower back, but you just scoop underneath and really squeeze your glutes at the top to find that connection. If that is incredibly easy for you, you can go a single leg at a time, but we're not trying to make this a workout. You're trying to make this like a priming session for your glutes so that they are aware of their existence before you get out there. And if you do this, you will often find better glute engagement, because a lot of the time we, as runners or people who train or do whatever, we often have decent glutes. We have strong glutes. We just don't connect to them very well on our run. There's some other strategies we can do as well, but if you're having mild Achilles issues or calf strains or stuff, those can often be signs that you're not using your whole posterior chain very well. And since the glute is the big driver in that posterior chain when you were on, in anything. But yes, I realize the calf takes a lot of load, so does the foot when we're looking proportional, just because it's down lower. But if your glutes aren't doing their job, then we're often going to end up with injuries and problems. So if you struggle to find that connection, doing some unweighted hip thrust before you go out, 10 to 15, can make all the difference. And it has helped quite a few people I've coached. So give it a shot, see what you think, and let people know, pop it in the comments or whatever we do on these things. Now, before we get rolling, I want to talk about this whole UTMB thing. And I am not one to take, strong opinions one way or the other, but I am been really struggling with what I've seen there, and I'm sure everyone listening to this has their opinions on it. And I don't want to push one on you, but my end, we see what they did with Wham, where they took a race that was well established. Somebody else had gone out and done all the legwork for Gary, and then some shisty things happened between them and Vail, who was my former employer, for the record. And then now there's this UTMB race that looks basically the exact same as Gary's old race and is not owned by him anymore. So, when you do all that legwork, you put in the effort to create this big race and you build this community around it, and then it's just taken out from under you, not great. And then they're structuring about stones and whatever, while claiming to be this big environmental company. Definitely a little problematic, because you have to travel a bunch of distance to get to these races in order to qualify. And then finally, the big nail in the coffin for me was them firing Corinne as an announcer at the race, just because she is speaking out about various opinions she has. And I think if we are going to say that we want a engaged community, I think we should support our leaders in it, of which Corinne is definitely one of them. So to have her not supported by that and fired for speaking her mind. Obviously, they're a private company. They can do what we want. But on that note, we do not have to support them if you don't like them. So if you are as frustrated and whatever, you often see people say like, well, they weren't going to qualify for UTMB anyway, so they shouldn't have an opinion. I definitely fall in that. There's no way I would ever qualify for UTMB. So maybe that invalidates this. But I do have an opinion, and I think what they're doing is messed up. So that's my 2 cents on the matter, and I'm going to move forward with that. But I would say if you're not a fan, don't give them money. Anyway, I've been really attracted to the community of trail running. Like, I think that's this big root, right? Like, I didn't want to become a trail runner because I loved running, because when I found this space, I actually hated it. But I really was attracted to a community of people who like to do hard stuff outside. And if we're going to make steps to strip that community, I just not a fan. So anyway, let's move into the big topic of the day, which is cross-training. So you might see this as cross-training. That's the most common name for it. I've also seen it as alternative training. I think we're a little quibbling over semantics there. It might be a valuable thing to consider, but regardless, I'm going to call it cross-training because that is going to be the easiest for everyone, since that's what we've been calling it forever. And if we're looking at ways to do cross-training, there are many. The main idea is that you are trying to boost volume for one reason or another through methods other than running. And I personally do not qualify strength training as cross-training. I think it's a different thing that you should absolutely be doing. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a huge fan of strength work. But I think cross-training, at least for my purposes, I qualify it as another cardiovascularly boosting activity that you do that is not running, that can help increase your cardio volume and maybe get some other side benefits along the way. So if we're going to look at an ideal way to do cross-training, you would take your running volume and then we would add more like zone 1, zone 2, this low volume, low stress training. And we would do that in a manner that's not running. And we can do that for a wide variety of reasons. One is that running is a lot on the body. It is an intense sport. So if you are doing a lot of running, we can't just keep scaling. And if you're one of these 100-mile plus per week runners, that is fantastic. Most people would break if we did that. I'm definitely in that camp. My joints couldn't handle that. So we can't just keep scaling running ad infinitum, right? Like, we have to create a cap that we can from which we can actually recover. And if we aren't getting enough cardiovascular training while staying under that cap, we can boost it with cross training. Now, ideally, because running is a skill, it is a skill-based sport, you would do your higher speed stuff you would do all of your like higher speed, higher intensity cardio stuff like zone 3, 4, 5, etc. while you're running. You would get that volume through running. And a large reason for that is running at faster speeds pushes a skill, like your form tends to be better. This is one of the main purposes of strides or surges in the middle of your run. It creates better leg turnover, you get better extension, and it just enforces good form. So if possible, we would want all of our like workouts and higher intensity training to be running, and then we would supplement our lower volume with cross training. And one of the main reasons would be the injury risk is really low. Running is an impact sport. Every time your foot hits the ground, it puts a bit of stress in your body. And if you are prone to stress fractures or injuries, or you have joint issues, then those things add up and we can just run ourselves into problems, pardon the pun. And if we do something like biking or elliptical or whatever else, it is lower impact, which means it is lower injury risk, so we can increase our volume without encountering as many problems. We can also see some injury prevention benefits here, depending on your mechanism of cross-training. So we see like a lot of repetitive use injuries in running as well. It's not just the impact. If you're not doing a ton of strength work, or you don't have a big like alternate sports background, then, and if you've been running for quite a while, we end up with the same gait, same forward pattern. And this is why one of the main reasons we see more injuries, or I don't know if more, but I heard a stat that there's like a higher injury percentage on roads than on trails, and couldn't quote it for you. Pardon my lack of like PubMed link. But one of the main reasons is we're going forward, straight. It's the same movement over and over again. This is one of the reasons that while people often think the Chicago Marathon is really easy because it's super flat, it can actually be super stressful because you're running 26.2 miles in the exact same step over and over and over again. And we can just run into these repetitive use problems, right? So doing other activities, be it biking or elliptical or whatever, changes the gait enough that you activate slightly different muscles. If you are really fit, but you never bike, hop on a bike and push it pretty hard for 20 minutes, and I guarantee you're going to feel some new things. This is one of the reasons that bikers often have that like big teardrop muscle in their quad. It engages your VMO really strongly. It uses your glutes, especially if we're going uphill or standing up in the saddle. So you will engage different muscles. So that also reduces your injury risk and can have some prevention benefits when we actually get out to our main sport, which is running. And if we're looking at this from a seasonal standpoint, it can give you a break. So like Kilian is famous for taking almost the entire winter off and doing a ton of skimo. This is what Walmsley did last year. He took most of the winter off and did a ton of skimo. Skimo is an incredibly cardiovascularly challenging thing, so it can give you all of that benefit from training, but it doesn't put the same tax on your joints, and it can just give you a break. If you're running 12 months out of the year, that's great for a lot of people, but for even more, it's probably not. Like a lot of us need a mental break to step away from training. You might want to do other sports. You might be into cross country or backcountry skiing or just cycling or whatever. And these things can give you that mental break while also keeping up your cardio. Now, if we look at some like different modalities, one would be biking. I've mentioned it a couple times, and biking is an incredibly useful form of cross training. For one, it uses your legs and it's zero impact. So you get a lot of that crossover benefit from a like strength standpoint. You're still using the same basic muscles, but you're not putting impact into your joints or your bones. So we can greatly increase our volume from a cardiovascular standpoint without creating as much risk for injury. And I already talked about some of the injury prevention stuff, but we see this a lot when we look at different sports. So for one, cycling. Obviously, they bike a lot, but their volume of training is so much higher. A professional cyclist's volume of cycling is so much higher than a professional runner's volume of running, if we're looking at time in the saddle versus time on feet. And that is just because it is a less bone stressing, tendon stressing sport. So they can put in more volume without as much risk for injury. And if we look at some of the like benefits for non-professionals, or I guess if we can just increase our volume of cardio, we can get a lot of these boosts. We see this with the Norwegians, this famous like Norwegian training cycle. It's not just runners, like cross-country skiers in Norway put a lot of time on the bike, and they do a lot of everything from zone 1 to zone 3 work. They get those like double days or double lactate workouts. And this is where we can make that happen because it's not as high impact, it's not as high on the injury risk, but it can really boost your volume and get your heart and lungs stronger without putting as much stress on the body and risking injury. We also have a stair stepper, which is impact, but it's lower. And this is really good, especially if you're coming to a climbing mountainous race. And if you are doing a mountainous race and you have an access to a stair stepper, but you don't have access to mountains, we should be on that stair stepper. Like this is a big thing I used for someone who's trying to do the Barkley, and it really helped to get strong for the hills. We also see this with a lot of people trying to train for like Wasatch when they're in Kansas or whatever. If you have access to a stair stepper, we can get that glute drive, we can get that good form without it being as much of a problem when it comes to bone injury risk. And you don't have to like run up a flight of stairs and then come back down and run up a flight of stairs and come back down. That gets arguably less tedious than the stair stepper if you've ever spent a bunch of time on one, but it's still a really good training mechanism. We also have a elliptical, which has some crossover to running. I highly recommend you find one that fits your gait if you have access to a couple ones in the gym. Some of them are really short and some of the strides are really long. So we don't want to be like overreaching too far. We don't want to have this like super choppy step. We still want to be able to use our muscles when we're on the elliptical. So this should fit your body. If you don't have much of a choice, that's fine. Just use what you have. Ideally, we would find an elliptical that like feels like a natural stride to you. If you're 7 feet tall and you have this elliptical pattern that's a really small gait, it's just going to feel choppy and weird. And same for me, I'm 5'7". If I had one that's like built for a basketball player, it wouldn't fit either, right? So we want one that actually fits your body and trains well. And then finally, there's swimming. There's probably a bunch of other mechanisms. There's like a Versa climber and a Jacob's ladder and all these things. They are fantastic. They will murder you. They're really good for like zone 3 and up training, which we'll get to in a second. But if we're looking at something like basic low-level stuff, swimming is also really good. This would not be my first choice unless you love it, because swimming does reduce your bone density a little bit, which is not great when we're looking at stress fractures and injuries. And there's also like almost zero muscle crossover, right? When they've done tests on athletes of different sports and who had decent like ability to perform well in another sport, all skill aside, swimmers had the least crossover to others and others had the least crossover to swimming. Because if we just look at Michael Phelps, fairly thin legs, big mermaid-like body, same, and then vice versa if we look at a sprinter, right? Big, powerful legs, small upper body. So if we are looking at something that's actually going to help you from a muscular standpoint, swimming is not going to be your best. Now, it's still good cardio if you do it. If you love it, you should do it. Like it's just not ideal as a crossover for running, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means if you were looking solely for a cardio mechanism that helps you improve your running, that would not be my first choice. Now, if possible, we want to keep some running. I say this because cross training can be a great way to get yourself through an injury, right? So if we are looking at an injured person, you might not be able to do any running, and that is fine. So we would want to spend a ton of time on the bike. Rower, I forgot, that's really good too, because it's almost no impact. So all of these things can be super useful, and you can still keep your cardio up, even though you're not able to run. But if you are able to run and you're just trying to take a season off, or you're trying to reduce your volume, then we want to be running, and we want to be doing it fairly frequently. It's not necessarily like a long run on a weekend. If you're looking from a pure training perspective, we'd keep a high percentage of our training of cardio, and then we just run a couple miles like every day or two. And that would help keep the skill really relevant, but it won't have as much impact and can give you that break. A mile a day is better than 15 miles on a Sunday from a training perspective, because again, running is a skill and we want to keep practicing that skill and keep it fresh. This is less important with more experienced athletes. If you've been running for 30 years and your running feels really good and your form's really good and there's no problems, then you're not going to lose it in 3 months. You're not. Take the winter off, go ski mode, do some backcountry skiing, and you'll be fine. If you're a newer runner who's trying to increase your volume, then we want to keep that frequency of running while we drop your volume. This would be the same or increase your cardio volume, but drop your volume of running. And this would be the same for someone who's like coming off of a race. We can increase your cardio by getting on the bike, and then we just keep your running really low volume and very frequent. Now, if you are like trying to do this as your primary training modality, i.e. like coming back from an injury, this is where we need to look at actually pushing the intensity a little bit. So we do want to get some of those like zone 3 and up on a 5-zone model, whatever. We do want to get some of that like higher intensity stuff, like the lactate threshold, the VO2 max, the stridey kind of things. We do want to push that a little bit because we don't want to lose that top end just because we can't run. So if you're coming back from an injury and you can only run at like a 1-to-1 minute on, minute off ratio, and you're trying to keep that frequency, then we do want to push that intensity on the bike or on the rower or whatever have you. We're going to actually train more like a cyclist or like a triathlete so that we can still get the wide range of cardio benefits that we would without having as much stress on the body. So quick recap, like cross training is great. Ideally, if you're healthy and you're just trying to increase your cardio volume, we would just do low zone 1, zone 2 on a modality that has some crossover to running. So this is where like 2-a-days can come in handy for people like really trying to train for a big race, or if you just don't have the ability to run every day due to like stress in the body, then we can just boost it with cycling or elliptical or stair stepper or whatever. If you're injured, then we want to get a much wider range of our cardio zones while trying to come back to running as frequently as possible. And this means that you're going to train in a much higher intensity zone, you're going to train in a much higher intensity zone than you would if you're just trying to take some time off or trying to boost your overall volume. So that's cross training. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments. I'm going to head out and go hang with the dogs and get some food. Good to be back to these. I'm feeling a lot better for those of you who've been following the depression saga, and we should be a little bit more back on track. So I'll be back with another one of these later this week, and I'm going to drop an interview with Heather Hart later as well about burnout and taking that needed time off. So hope y'all are doing well, and I'll be back with another one soon. See ya. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it, or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.